Hello, everyone, and welcome again to our second in our series of conference Capture an IDP conference 2023, which will be held September 6th and 7th in just south of Chicago. Looking forward to it. Looking forward to continuing the series. Today we have with us Andrew. Excuse me. We have today with us Andrew Pery, who is an ethical AI evangelist. He will be speaking at the conference, and let me make sure I've got this right. His topic is the inevitable wave of AI regulations, balancing utility and harms. And we're going to get a little bit of a sense about AI and what he's going to be talking about today, and hopefully get all of you excited for to come join us at the event. Andrew, good to see you again. Good to talk to you again, and thank you for joining me.
Likewise, it's a pleasure to connect with you, and I'm looking forward to this conversation with you.
I'm looking forward to learning because you know way more about this than I do. So
Well, I hope my
let
reputation doesn't precede me.
let's start off with kind of just a basic question, and just quickly, can you explain what AI is and what it isn't?
Sure. So, at the risk of oversimplification, AI is essentially an algorithm or a smart machine that's, designed to perform, specific tasks that kind of mimics, human intelligence. But I want to qualify that statement because there are basically two fundamental classifications of AI systems. The first of which is what's defined as narrow AI. And these are AI applications that are designed to perform very specific tasks. And of course, we've seen these. So when we look at, for example, OCR technology and intelligent document processing, they use machine learning technology like supervised machine learning that's based on training data, or convolutional neural nets for image classification and extraction. And these technologies have been around for a while. And of course, they perform these tasks much better and much more accurately than humans can. They recognize, they provide high level of recognition, extraction, and classification rates. So these technologies have been around for a while, and they provide obviously significant utility for those organizations that deploy these technologies. But on the other hand, there's another class of AI systems which is defined as general AI. And of course, an example of this is a large language model such as ChatGPT that we obviously heard a lot about. There's a lot of buzz about ChatGPT, a lot of momentum, a lot of conversation, and sort of generative AI applications like ChatGPT, come much closer to human cognitive capabilities. They use much more advanced, deep neural networks and analytical capabilities that is based on analysis of large volumes of text, and then use natural language to produce output which sounds like a human conversation. And of course, at times, they produce very accurate results, as we have seen. At times, they're questionable results in cases where there's potential risk of harm and also disinformation. So there's a lot of, I think, discussion around just how close, generative AI comes to human cognitive intelligence, right? And as we've seen just recently, some of the subject matter experts like Geoffrey Hinton from Google have, sort of penned a quite a dystopian view of the potential impact of ChatGPT, calling for, in fact, a moratorium for any further development. And in fact, he's projecting or predicting that unless there's some significant, guardrails around, conversational AI, it can, potentially risk, human existentialist stress, existentialist threat to humankind. So I think, there is this, fundamental, evolution of AI into the realm of general AI. But, I think we have to keep in mind that even general AI applications like ChatGPT, they don't really have human reasoning capabilities or human cognitive capabilities or compassion or analysis capabilities. I think of it this way, the human brain consists of 100 billion neurons. So it's going to be a while before, general AI applications will supplant, if you will, human cognitive intelligence. But there is this underlying, skepticism and concern. And this is why you're seeing, I think, a significant momentum towards regulating AI, providing for some guardrails that really ensures that AI applications, such as general AI applications, are used for things that have real socioeconomic utility.
Okay. Yeah, as you were talking about Chat GPT, it was funny. It's not the end all and be all. I've noticed in the past month or maybe month or so that they start putting up a notice that the pool that you're of knowledge that it's drawing from is 2021 or 2022. I can't remember
That's
the
correct.
date now.
Yeah.
Yeah, but that wasn't there until people there was a little bit of that blowback.
Well, indeed.
Um,
I mean, ChatGPT, basically scrapes information from the internet, but it has its limits, right? And of course, the responses are just as good as the information that its
right.
analysis is based on. Yeah.
Yeah. So you talked a little bit about this, the apocalyptic version, dystopian view of AI out there. So, from your point of view, what are you most concerned about regarding artificial intelligence?
Yeah, so there are many different dimensions to that question. You know, First of all, I think it has a tendency to amplify bias because it's based on training data upon which the algorithm delivers its output, right? And as David Weinberger of Harvard University put it, he's one of their leading sort of commentators on AI technology. He said, and I'm quoting from him, bias is machine learning's original sin. And so when you look at that, there are a number of issues associated with AI technology that I'm certainly concerned about, and I think many folks are concerned about. The first is the bias associated with AI. So there are different types of bias: historical bias, aggregation bias, confirmation bias. And so it's important to ensure that effective, best practices, data governance best practices are put in place to ensure that the data quality upon which these algorithms work, are setting up the scrutiny and in fact provide accurate results. The second, dimension of this is that AI itself is somewhat opaque, right? It's hard to understand exactly how they work and the outputs that they generate. Sometimes even the developers themselves, even some of the folks within ChatGPT acknowledge that they don't fully understand the responses and the answers that ChatGPT provides. So I think explainability of AI systems will become also an important consideration to ensure consumers and provide them with the level of transparency to determine, how these outcomes, produce the results, and secondly, how to mitigate potential harmful impacts to create that level of consumer trust. The second is the whole issue of enforceability. In other words, consumers are at the risk of demonstrating, risk associated with the AI, outputs and harmful impacts. And I think it's important for legislators and certainly within the community to ensure that it's easier for consumers to demonstrate potential harm and to shift the onus from consumers themselves to the developers. There'll be a presumption of harm and will be a rebuttable presumption by the developers themselves as opposed to putting this burden on consumers themselves. So, inherent bias, concerning AI technology, the opaqueness and providing explainability, and thirdly, to ensure that we mitigate potential adverse impacts or harmful impacts arising from the more relevant application of AI technology.
So let's flip that question around. What are you optimistic about?
Well, first of all, I think it's important to note that AI applications are becoming pervasive, right? It's impacting virtually every dimension of our lives, whether it's IoT devices, whether it's driverless cars, the use of these technologies to make, your work more effective and reduce the redundant, repetitive, kind of labor-intensive tasks using AI technology. So I think, there is obviously a need to ensure that there is harmonization of regulation of AI, to ensure that we develop specific standards before we introduce AI technology to the marketplace. There needs to be legal certainty that balances innovation between AI technology and preserving and safeguarding consumer rights. And so we're seeing momentum in the marketplace towards, this regulatory framework. At the vanguard of this is obviously the European Union. And, they have proposed what's called the EU Artificial Intelligence Act. It has gone through several levels of amendments. There's a compromise text out there that the European Parliament voted on. And there's an expectation that by the end of this summer, there will be a first sort of comprehensive, regulation of AI. Also, I think it's important to note that technology vendors themselves are implementing rigorous sort of voluntary codes of conduct because it's in their best interest to do so. Because obviously AI technology is disruptive, it's transformational, and it makes good business sense, right? To implement effective, governance best practices that creates consumer trust, engenders, brand equity. And I think there's a lot of, positive social utility of AI. And you can look at in terms of, the nature of work might change fundamentally that really sort of, I would say, emancipates, people from the tedious labor-intensive tasks, healthcare, transportation, environment. I think there's, faster introduction of drugs to the marketplace. I think these are, significant opportunities for us to improve the quality of life on the one hand, improve efficiency, and create sustainable, competitive advantages in the marketplace. So there's a lot of positives from AI. The question is, making sure that we are able to control the more sort of, I would say, nefarious potential uses of AI, and also to limit the kinds of applications of AI that may create, disparate treatment or disparate impact of consumers.
Yeah, so on the one hand, it's almost like we have a dystopian future with
Yes.
Skynet and our AI overlords, and then on the other hand, we have iRobot, Asimov's iRobot, and that perspective, and we'll, as always, we'll wind up somewhere in the middle, skewed toward one end or the other.
Yeah, absolutely.
So picking up on your emancipation of work standpoint, I didn't write down the numbers, but there's some stats in your session description. And I wanted to ask you, do you think AI is a job creator or destroyer? Not to be dismissive, but there are always, the buggy whip makers that are going to go out of business as technology advances. I suppose the answer is somewhere yes to both, I guess.
Yeah, I think this is kind of the $64 million question. There is no doubt that in the short term, there could be significant, adverse impacts with the introduction of AI technology. A couple of data points. Goldman Sachs, one of the leading investment, firms in the marketplace, has done analysis on this, as have others as well, and they project that virtually 2/3 of jobs in the marketplace today could be somewhat adversely impacted by the introduction of AI technology. That translates to some 300 million jobs. They don't say that all of these jobs will be, impacted fully, but there will be some implications, right? And certainly, I think, there's some concern about that. There is sort of a presumption that, introduction of disruptive technologies represents a zero-sum game, right? In other words, you take jobs away, and then you're not going to replace those jobs with new jobs, right?
Right.
But the World Economic Forum, on the other hand, so the other hand of the equation, projects that by the end of 2026, AI technology will create something in the nature of 95 million net new jobs. And so I think we have to think in terms of looking at the history as well. We've seen these disruptive events occur with the Industrial Revolution, with the introduction of computers. And there's always that level of, I would say, healthy skepticism that, oh my God, the jobs will be taken away. I think the key thing here is no question in the short run there will be negative impacts. But I think we need to have sort of a whole of society effort, right? I think retraining and job skill, upskilling, right, is going to be important. There has to be an investment in that regard, right? Secondly, I think, we have to think in terms of what are the jobs of the future? Somebody will have to monitor these AI systems, right?
Right.
Somebody will have to do quality assurance on them, right? And so I think that there's a real potential for creating a new, sort of classes of maybe most highly enriching jobs, right? But I think, retraining is going to be important. And I think as part of this as well, is we have to make sure that, we just don't introduce this AI technology without any sort of oversight and regulation. I think we have to phase it in to make
Hmm.
sure that there's ample time to make this transition happen, that we don't alienate and disenfranchise potentially millions of people and create, socioeconomic tensions. So I think there has to be a collaboration between, industry, government, and whole of society to ensure that we go through this transformation, because unlike any other transformation, this is potentially the most consequential one, right?
Hmm.
And just recently, the US and the EU have agreed in principle of some kind of a collaboration, to encourage, high tech industry to create voluntary codes of conduct, and also to impose, more rigorous processes in place for introducing and commercializing AI applications that's consistent with also the socioeconomic impacts. So I think this is going to be the biggest challenge for organizations and for society in general, to make sure that we don't end up with millions of people being disenfranchised and
Yeah.
and at the margins of society.
Yeah, it's funny when you were talking for the image of job
Yeah,
destruction or creation.
yeah.
The image of the typing pool from 9 to 5 popped into my head. It's like you don't see those anymore. Computers kind of everybody's
Exactly,
their own typist now. Um,
exactly. Yeah,
but so yes. Um, so from my standpoint, I wanted to ask about, generative AI tools like GPT. I make a
yeah,
career out of words. The marketing industry is basically in a state of mass panic about AI
yes,
taking over everybody's job,
right.
which, whatever. But to me, you mentioned earlier that, the generative tools are only as good as what they're trained on, and then they spit out an answer or whatever. What are the copyright implications of these tools? Because it's
Yeah,
basically mass plagiarism, 2 words at a time.
yes. And I think it's a very valid question, because we are already seeing significant potential issues concerning with generative AI from a legal perspective. And a couple of things I think will obviously surface over the next little perspective time. The first is, as you pointed out, the intellectual property rights, right? So ChatGPT is using content from the internet, and a lot of the content is subject to copyright, right? And so I think we're going to be seeing some significant challenges to how ChatGPT is leveraging this technology, and to what extent the content that they're using might infringe upon intellectual property rights, particularly copyright infringement. Secondly, it's the privacy rights, right? Often, that the content that's being used might potentially expose personally identifiable information. So already in the U.S., there is a complaint issued by the Center for AI and Digital Policy, claiming potentially deceptive practices associated with ChatGPT because of lack of transparency in terms of privacy rights, copyright infringement. So I think we're going to see potentially significant, let's say, litigation arising out of the more broad deployment of generative AI applications.
Okay.
Also, for example, just recently in Canada, the Canadian Privacy Commissioner has started an investigation of ChatGPT from the perspective of how it potentially adversely impacts, privacy rights. So I think we're going to see perhaps a significant increase in potential legal challenges and legal issues arising, protecting a work product of original expression of ideas from the authors that have published materials on the internet, to intellectual property rights. Clearly things like artistic rights, right? I think is going to be impacted by it. You talked about what's happening right now with the strike within the writing community within the entertainment industry. There's a concern about how ChatGPT will supplant original works. And so I think we're going to see potentially proliferation of legal challenges or legal issues arising.
Yeah. So wanted to. There's a bunch of follow-up questions I'd love to go into
Yeah.
that. Well, we don't have time for that, and it's not this interview is not for me, so it's for my audience. So let's talk about ethics for a moment. In your opinion, what is the most important ethical concern with artificial intelligence?
Right. So, I mean, I think that's the kind of the crux of the issue with respect to, general AI. And, when you talk about AI, there's sort of two dimensions to it. There's the sort of the ethical component, and there is responsible AI. So the ethical component, if you look at, where the word ethics, derives from, the Greek word of ethos, right? And that's a normative value of human dignity, autonomy, justice, equity, right? Utility. On the other hand, responsible AI is a set of tools that enable organizations to ensure that it produces, equitable results, right?
Mhm.
And we made progress around, responsible AI in terms of transparency, accountability, explainability, confidentiality, security. The standards have arisen, risk management frameworks have been, put in place. But where I think there's still significant challenges is how do you ensure that even though the AI algorithm produces accurate results, are the results equitable, right? Is there a need to have sort of a corrective component to AI technology, notwithstanding the accurate statistical results? An example of this, for example, in lending, right, in financial institutions, right? Lending API applications typically use the FICO score, right, to make a determination of your eligibility for credit, where many marginalized people never applied for a loan before, never been, don't have a FICO credit score. So they could be denied for a loan, right? So one of the aspects of ethical AI is to make sure that there's human agency, there's human oversight to look at the results and make sure that they actually produce the kind of, desirable outcomes that we as a society, desire to produce, to lift everybody up, right? To make credit available to a larger constituency. But that applies to all kinds of other use cases, whether it's employment, criminal justice system, right? So there's this corrective component of AI. And I think this is where we're going to see, I think, significant, I would say, challenges and conversations as to how to make sure that this balance between, creating social justice and social equity, making AI available to a larger constituency of stakeholders than currently it's available, versus the utility of AI, that it produces efficiency, produces economic, value to businesses, right? So that's going to be, I think, the $64 million question of how we're
Mhm.
going to deal with it and who is going to be responsible. Because what is ethical, right? It's contextual, right? From the from whose perspective are we trying to enforce or impose ethical principles, right?
Mhm.
And of course, finally, it's also a governmental issue. How will government respond to this? What sort of policies would they put in place to ensure that there is a continuous monitoring of how AI impacts society as a whole? And I think this is where we're going to see massive, I think, transformational initiatives arise. And hopefully at the end of the day, it's going to have a net, positive impact.
As you were talking about sort of the brute force aspect of AI to be able to deliver
Yeah.
the efficiency and all the good things that it does,
Right,
reminds me of what you said at the beginning of our conversation, that there's no cognition, there's no judgment on the part of AI.
right,
It's using how to figure out how to use AI to help make a decision, as opposed to AI
yeah,
always making the decision, which could be, as you just said, unethical, or not unethical, unequal,
right.
and not serving societal,
Well, in
broader
fact, yeah,
societal ends.
yeah. In fact, yeah, you're quite correct, Brian, because one of the key dimensions of the EU Artificial Intelligence Act, apart from other things in terms of transparency and accountability and risk management, is human oversight.
Mm.
So what that really means is that there needs to be an obligation on the providers of AI system, to analyze the outputs, right? And to make sure that they have an oversight and also the ability to override the decisions of the AI system and make human judgment, to reflect upon, what potential harmful impacts, notwithstanding the accuracy of the algorithm it might produce. So I think this is the balancing act that I think we'll have to, be aware of and be cognizant of to make sure that, we are able to fully realize not just the economic, value of AI, but also the societal value.
Yeah, yeah. I wanted to wrap up with a question specific to what you're going to be talking about at the event, which is the regulatory environment. So, just give us a little bit of a preview of regulations in AI and what your talk will focus on.
For sure. So this is, by the way, almost a daily evolving, sort of process because uh, just, recent, as I mentioned, the European Parliament voted on the compromise text of the EU Artificial Intelligence Act, and there's an expectation that the full Parliament will be voting on it in this month. But then just this morning and yesterday, I just saw an update that there's still some significant issues arising from some of the proposed amendments. But essentially, what AI regulation attempts to do, certainly the EU, AI regulation, is to create and impose a risk-based framework for evaluating the potential risks associated with AI technologies, right? And they sort of created a classification of AI systems from anywhere from prohibited AI systems, for example, social scoring, to high-risk AI systems, like, for example, impacting, whether it's your economic, impacts or your privacy rights, is to create a set of, high-risk AI systems to all the way down to, low-risk AI systems. With respect to high-risk AI systems, they're proposing a rigorous mechanism where even before you put an AI system on the market, you have to go through what's called, ex ante, conformance testing. And it has to be, gone through a rigorous process to make sure that you have the quality processes in place, that the AI system behaves in accordance with expectations and the desired outcomes. And then once that's been certified, because that has to be certified and before you put it in the marketplace, then you have a continuous process of monitoring, transparency, accountability, human agency, oversight of the AI system to make sure that we're mitigating potential harms. And what we're seeing is that the EU is kind of seen as the vanguard, if you will, of innovation around these regulations, including, for example, the GDPR, the General Data Protection Regulation. Other jurisdictions are following it. So, in the US, it's much more sectoral in nature. There are a number of states that have implemented, regulations concerning AI, as has, in Canada, there's a proposed legislation in place. So I think ultimately what we're going to see over the next maybe 12 to 18 months is a more comprehensive regulatory framework emerging that creates a heightened level of obligations on providers of AI systems. At the same time, onerous requirements to ensure that consumer harms are mitigated. And so there's obviously a significant level of effort in this area, and we're seeing a lot of momentum towards some form of regulation, particularly in light of the advances that we're seeing with generative AI that would have potentially, broad, pervasive implications.
I'm not quite sure how to frame this, but it seems as you were talking about that, especially when you mentioned the U.S. and sort of the federal and then state. Do you see sort of a balkanization of rules and sort of a patchwork emerging, or I mean, obviously that's a real problem here politically in the U.S. But is that also an issue around the rest of the world?
Well, I think certainly because of the sort of the sectoral nature of the U.S. Regulatory framework, I think we're going to see somewhat of I would say a disparate set of regulations, right? Not so much so in other jurisdictions, but I think what we're going to see, just as we have seen with the General Data Protection Regulation, because it sets a high watermark, that there will be obviously an effort to try to harmonize these regulations to the extent that's possible, because more than anything else, AI has no boundaries, right? data has no boundaries, right? So there's an overriding desire to ensure that there is, sort of predictability, legal certainty in terms of, AI technologies, because it's impacting commerce, globally.
Hmm.
Secondly, there needs to be, I think, a more predictable set of regulations that sets out, what are the obligations, right? And so I think ultimately, while we're going to see more of I would say, a disparate set of regulations arising, ultimately, I think they will coalesce around a set of universal, sort of, let's say, shared principles that sets a baseline, right, around which everyone can agree that these are desirable, objectives to achieve. But we're going to see, I think, not necessarily a full balkanization, but I think perhaps maybe nuances in terms of how these regulations are being implemented and ratified. It's unlikely in the US, just as we don't have in the US a national data privacy regulation. It's unlikely that the US will see a national, regulation around AI technology. I think we're going to see a more, state-based regulations.
Okay. Um, I'm sure we could talk for the rest of the day about this, but
Yeah,
we're gonna draw this to a close. Thank you very much, Andrew. I hope everyone listening found this useful. Hope you made it all the way to the end. I think this was a fascinating conversation. We look forward to seeing you in Chicago, September 6th and 7th.
likewise.
And thank you very much.
And Brian, thank you again for this opportunity, and I'm looking forward to participating in and contributing to the conference in September. So thank you for this opportunity. Appreciate it.